Donald J. Trump, a real estate mogul and reality TV star, stormed onto the political scene with a simple yet potent slogan, "Make America Great Again." This resonated with millions of Americans who felt left behind by globalization, economic shifts, and what they perceived as a decline in American power. Trump, with his brash style and outsider status, promised to shake up the establishment and return the country to its former glory. His campaign rallies became legendary, filled with fervent supporters drawn to his message of economic nationalism and promises to restore American jobs. Trump tapped into a deep well of frustration and anger, particularly among white working-class voters who felt ignored by the political elite. He promised to bring back manufacturing jobs, renegotiate trade deals, and put America first in all matters of foreign policy. Trump's victory in the 2016 presidential election shocked many defying polls and pundits who had dismissed his candidacy. His win was a testament to the power of his message and his ability to connect with a segment of the population that felt unheard and unseen. With his inauguration, the era of Make America Great Again had begun. At the heart of Trump's plan to make America great again was his economic policy. Potent mix of tax cuts, deregulation, and protectionist trade measures. These measures were designed to stimulate economic growth and create jobs across the country. He argued that by reducing the tax burden on businesses and individuals, he could unleash an economic boom that would benefit all Americans. The idea was that with more money in their pockets, businesses would invest more in their operations and consumers would spend more, driving demand and creating a virtuous cycle of growth. His signature legislative achievement, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, slashed corporate tax rates and provided tax relief for many individuals. This act was one of the most significant overhauls of the US tax code in decades, aiming to make American businesses more competitive on the global stage. Trump also targeted regulations that he believed were stifling business growth and job creation. By cutting red tape, he aimed to make it easier for businesses to operate and expand, which he believed would lead to more jobs and higher wages for American workers. His administration rolled back environmental regulations, loosened financial regulations, and eased rules on energy production. These changes were intended to reduce costs for businesses and encourage investment in key sectors like energy and finance. These actions were cheered by businesses and investors, but drew criticism from environmental groups and consumer advocates who argued that they would harm public health and safety. Critics warned that rolling back environmental protections could lead to increased pollution and health problems, while loosening financial regulations could increase the risk of another financial crisis. The results of Trump's economic policies were a subject of intense debate. While some praised the strong economic indicators, others pointed out that not all Americans were benefiting equally. His supporters pointed to a strong economy, low unemployment rates, and a surging stock market as evidence of his success. They argued that the tax cuts and deregulation had created a more favorable business environment, leading to job creation and higher wages. Critics countered that the economic gains were largely benefiting the wealthy and corporations, while income inequality continued to widen. They argued that the tax cuts disproportionately favored the rich, and that many of the new jobs created were low-paying or temporary. They also argued that the tax cuts would lead to unsustainable levels of government debt. With reduced tax revenue, the government would have to borrow more to fund its operations, potentially leading to higher interest rates and slower economic growth in the long run. The debate over the true impact of Trump's economic policies continues, with both sides presenting compelling arguments and data to support their views. Trump's social policies were equally as divisive as his economic agenda, often igniting fierce debates on immigration, healthcare, and social issues. His approach to these matters was marked by a strong desire to reshape the American social landscape, often in ways that polarized the nation. Central to his campaign was the promise to build a wall along the US-Mexico border to curb illegal immigration, a pledge that resonated with his base but drew condemnation from critics who viewed it as xenophobic and impractical. The wall became a symbol of his administration's hardline stance on immigration, sparking numerous legal battles and protests. His administration implemented a zero-tolerance policy at the border, which led to the separation of migrant children from their families, sparking international outrage. The images of children in detention centers became a focal point of criticism, highlighting the human cost of the administration's policies. This policy was eventually reversed due to the overwhelming backlash, but the impact on affected families lingered. On healthcare, Trump vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, which he argued was a disaster. His administration's efforts to dismantle the law were a central theme of his presidency, reflecting his commitment to reducing government involvement in healthcare. However, his efforts to dismantle the law were met with resistance from Democrats and some Republicans, ultimately failing to gain enough support in Congress. The debates over healthcare reform were intense, with both sides presenting passionate arguments about the future of American healthcare. Despite this setback, his administration took steps to weaken the law through executive actions and legal challenges. These actions included reducing funding for enrollment programs and supporting lawsuits aimed at overturning key provisions of the ACA, which created uncertainty for millions of Americans relying on the law for their healthcare coverage. Trump's stance on social issues such as abortion and LGBTQ+ rights further inflamed passions on both sides of the political spectrum. His administration's policies often reflected the views of his conservative base, leading to significant changes in federal guidelines and regulations. He appointed conservative judges to the Supreme Court, emboldening anti-abortion activists who saw an opportunity to overturn Roe v. Wade, the landmark ruling that legalized abortion nationwide. These appointments were seen as a long-term strategy to shift the judicial landscape in favor of conservative values. His administration also rolled back protections for transgender individuals, reversing Obama-era guidelines that allowed transgender students to use bathrooms corresponding with their gender identity. This move was part of a broader effort to redefine civil rights protections, sparking significant backlash from LGBTQ+ advocacy groups and allies. Throughout his presidency, Trump's social policies were a lightning rod for controversy, mobilizing both supporters and opponents. The debates over these policies highlighted deep divisions within American society, with each side fiercely advocating for their vision of the country's future. The legacy of these policies continues to influence the political and social landscape as the nation grapples with the long-term effects of the Trump era. Trump's America First foreign policy marked a sharp departure from the globalist approach of his predecessors, prioritizing American interests above all else. This approach was characterized by a series of bold moves and controversial decisions that often put him at odds with both allies and adversaries on the world stage. One of his first major actions was to withdraw the United States from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, a deal that had been years in the making and involved multiple countries around the Pacific Rim. This move was seen as a rejection of multilateral trade agreements in favor of bilateral deals that he believed would be more beneficial to the US. In line with this philosophy, he renegotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement, resulting in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. This new agreement aimed to create a more balanced trade environment and address issues that Trump argued were unfair to American workers and industries. Another significant aspect of his foreign policy was the imposition of tariffs on goods from China, which sparked a trade war that roiled global markets. These tariffs were part of a broader strategy to pressure China into changing its trade practices, which Trump and his administration claimed were detrimental to the US economy. Trump's relationship with traditional US allies was often strained by his demands that they contribute more to their own defense. He argued that many NATO members were not meeting their financial commitments, and he pushed for a more equitable distribution of defense spending. His criticism of international organizations like NATO and the United Nations was a recurring theme throughout his presidency. He questioned the effectiveness and fairness of these institutions, arguing that they often placed an undue burden on the United States. In contrast to his often confrontational stance with other countries, Trump's approach to North Korea was a stark departure. He engaged in unprecedented diplomacy with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, holding summits aimed at denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. These meetings were historic, marking the first time a sitting US president had met with a North Korean leader. Despite the high-profile nature of these summits, the results were mixed. While they did lead to a temporary easing of tensions, concrete steps towards denuclearization remained elusive. Critics argued that the meetings gave North Korea legitimacy without securing significant concessions in return. Trump's foreign policy was often unpredictable and marked by sudden shifts in direction. This unpredictability was both a strength and a weakness, allowing him to keep adversaries off balance but also creating uncertainty among allies and within his own administration. One of the most controversial decisions of his presidency was the withdrawal of US troops from Syria. This move drew criticism from some who argued that it would create a vacuum for terrorist groups to fill and undermine the fight against ISIS. Supporters, however, saw it as a fulfillment of his promise to end endless wars and bring American troops home. Another bold move was his recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a decision that angered Palestinians and drew condemnation from the international community. This move was part of a broader strategy to reshape US policy in the Middle East, which also included withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal and imposing new sanctions on Iran. Overall, Trump's foreign policy was a mix of bold pronouncements, unconventional diplomacy, and a willingness to challenge the status quo. While his approach garnered both praise and criticism, it undeniably left a lasting impact on the global stage, reshaping America's relationships and its role in the world.